Do you know who we are? Does anyone even care? Poisoning our lungs and heart, tearing homes apart. You return to this world, blind to the stories we've told. Now you come back again. You don't care who we are.
Hi, I'm Michael Everts, and this is Fit to be Read. Goliath by Tochi Onyebuchi is quite the read. It is a compelling and fit to be read novel and an engrossing and fulfilling reading experience. I recommend Goliath to any reader, science fiction genre or otherwise, who values creative storytelling, real-life feeling characters, and stories that offer as much perseverance and hope as they do suffering and sadness. I also recommend this for readers who appreciate science fiction with strong representation of social awareness commentary or messaging, and who get into the idea of a short book that feels like a really long book. Reading the 300 plus page Goliath feels like a 600 plus page reading experience because it packs so many stories with implications that reach well beyond the words that appear on the pages. I recommend this for readers who demand strong prose and language in their sci-fi and want the sensation of, wow, this author really has an amazing way with words. I won't recommend this for readers who see a novel with a ton of characters and expect an eventual merging of stories that culminate into some amazing action and a large climactic moment. This isn't that book. As with each review on this channel, the episode will begin with a spoiler-free review to introduce you to the novel. Following the summary, I'll usually announce a 5 likes and a 5 dislikes segment that will give you a little bit more about what I'm thinking about and unpack some more of the thoughts. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to have a special guest, so I'm going to do 5-ish of each, and with my special guest together, we're going to end up with more than 5 likes and 5 dislikes. This review will not have any spoilers, so feel free to stay till the end and look for the special guest that's joining me today. Engage with me in the comment section. Let me know if you've read Goliath or other works by this author, or if you think you might add this to your reading list. I have to admit, I was a bit intimidated preparing for this review. The story is non-linear, it features a ton of symbolism, some clear and a lot that I'm sure that I missed, and as much despair and tragedy that inhabits the book's pages, there's also hope. But how do I talk about that hope without diminishing the tragic elements of the story? I don't know, so let's see. First off, Goliath is set in the future. The setting is dystopian and post-apocalyptic. The Earth is saturated with radiation and other toxic elements, causing the sky to be red, water tainted, and the soil riddled with poisonous elements. An early interesting initial statement in the book are the obvious comparisons to the future dystopia and the current real world that we live in. This not too far future Earth suffers from environmental collapse and a world order that sees the means of production, access to resources, and the reins of power held by those with privilege linked directly to skin color and wealth. The statement is as clear as the New Haven skies in the book are not clear. For many, our current world order is a dystopia. There are areas where domes have been set up. If you live in the domes, you are much less likely to die young of cancer than you are if you don't live in the domes. The safest and most privileged of all are those who have the means to move to the space colonies away from this poisoned Earth and to purchase the best available cybernetic enhanced biological upgrades. This message is hammered home in each of the stories of each of the characters in the novel. There are characters whose stories recall the situations and the correctional systems in the Earth's past, so our past and our present reality. The 1971 Attica prison riots are alluded to in a very emotional and gut-wrenching point in the book. Another set of characters that resonated with me were a couple, Jonathan and David. At the onset of Goliath, Jonathan is returning to the Earth, specifically New Haven, Connecticut. It's a bit on the nose for me to relate most with Jonathan, but it makes sense. I also feel that Jonathan's story, while abandoned for big chunks of the story, is necessary for really hammering home some of the biggest messages and warnings that this dystopian tale has to offer. I have to believe that it was intentional that Jonathan's story was featured heavily at the onset and then mostly abandoned until the end. Another character, Bishop, carries much of the novel, and his story truly links everyone else together and links the experiences. I think reacting to those experiences is going to be a very personal thing for many readers, and I think those experiences are best left for when you read the book. With some areas of the earth slowly being repaired and made habitable enough, folks from the colonies are starting to come back. Jonathan is one of those returnees. A story about underdogs and named Goliath is clearly going to feature a lot of biblical symbolism and references. Though I was raised Catholic, I wasn't a great Bible student, and I certainly missed many of the references. I can spend a little bit of time on Jonathan, though, because when I was sitting in pews and I was bored in church as a kid, one story that I was captivated by in the Bible was that of Jonathan and David. I was captivated because I read it as a love story. It wasn't until I was halfway through the book that I made the connection that they, in part, were based on that David and Goliath story in the Bible. I think everyone knows the battle of David versus Goliath, but what captivated to me as a teenager reading about the friendship between David and Jonathan in the Bible is how clearly, to me, it was a gay love story. For those that may not know, Jonathan was the son of Saul the king. I want to share a few passages. Admittedly, they are somewhat out of context, so I'm just going to kind of run them out here, but I'm not going to just sit here and read a really long Bible passage, so here goes. As soon as he had finished speaking to Saul, the soul of Jonathan was knit to the soul of David, and Jonathan loved him as his own soul. Then Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as his own soul. And Jonathan stripped himself of the robe that was on him and gave it to David, and his armor, and even his sword, and his bow, and his belt. And David went out and was successful wherever Saul sent him. But Jonathan, Saul's son, delighted much in David. And Jonathan told David, "Saul, my father, seeks to kill you. Therefore be on your guard in the morning. Stay in a secret place and hide yourself." David vowed again, saying, "Your father knows well that I have found favor in your eyes, and he thinks, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved." Then Jonathan said to David, "Whatever you say, I will do for you." And Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, "May the Lord take vengeance on David's enemies." And Jonathan made David swear again by his love for him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said to him, "You son of a perverse, rebellious woman, do I not know that you have chosen the son of Jesse to your own shame, and to the shame of your mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse lives on earth, neither you nor your kingdom shall be established. Therefore send and bring him to me, for he shall surely die." Whenever I was bored in church with no distractions, we didn't have cell phones back then to get lost in, I'd open to those passages and I'd get lost in that story. Every character in the book is confronted with or faces down a personal Goliath. Because David and Jonathan face a Goliath, it doesn't mean they're heroes. Because they also, in this book, represent a Goliath gentrification, does not also make them individually villains. The big villain in the book is not an individual, it's the system. There's no shortage of science fiction that directs its aim at the system, political institutions, the behavior of society, etc. And all too often, those stories, at times, lose sight of the science fiction. Onyebuchi strikes an incredible balance that keeps the focus on the story that he wants to tell and commentary on this system while never forsaking the futuristic science fiction world-building elements. The power of Onyebuchi's prose serves to articulate a precise point of view and scolds elements of future society that are very much clearly institutional in our real present. Gentrification, police brutality, the justice system and rehabilitation, devaluing communities of color, political disenfranchisement, state negligence, acceptance of wealth disparity, access to healthcare are all in his crosshairs. Onyebuchi has managed to create very complex characters very quickly, making the reading experience more engrossing, but occasionally at the cost of interfering with the clarity of his message. I think where the hope comes in among the suffering is that the author walks a line between illustrating what the character's life experiences are and the injustice, cruelty, and unfairness that exists, and also recognizing that the character's experience is not only that. Among the oppression and suffering, these characters still find their people and their community and moments of laughter and levity. There are a number of instances in the story where the characters don't sit back and accept the world order. They seek and find justice for themselves. They confront the villainous characters, and they confront agents of the villainous system and demand consideration, demand fairness, demand action. These are welcomed and necessary reprieves from the darker moments of the novel. It can be cliche to describe the book as one that I can't look away from. Goliath might be better noted as a how dare I think about looking away story. Goliath is a fascinating story. It's like a puzzle that is built starting with the corners and then different sections assembled as it works its way to a complete whole. This is an imagining based on a reality of what might become of minority communities in the direct aftermath of an apocalyptic event and the further out future. Now it's time for my 5-ish likes and dislikes, joined by my friend Erica from the excellent The Broken Spine for Tochi Onyebuchi's Goliath. Erica and I read Goliath as a buddy read, and you can see our full conversation about Goliath on her channel, and I'll link that video in the description. Dislike number 1, I'm left wondering if there was a more effective way to share the stories of these characters to make it more accessible. The other side of this, of course, is that because Onyebuchi wrote it in this genre in prose, it maybe meets an audience not already predisposed to hearing these stories elsewhere. Regardless, there are a few moments where the story and characters become confused, to which I'll often assume it's just a me thing, but I'm certain in this novel it wasn't always a me thing. I unfortunately have to share a little bit of that blame with the author. Like number 1, this book is important. It is important, I believe, because it represents a perspective, and it's a perspective that I believe is shared by many, and the author does a great job of articulating that message. Discussions about gentrification and disenfranchisement of people of color isn't anything new, but this is the first time that I've seen it shared this way and in this genre. Dislike number 2, large sections of monologues slow down an already slow read. Often the monologue speaker is not easy to identify, and it seems as if this is by design. This isn't a complaint on the style of the book. I enjoy the character POVs, but there are a few moments where it feels less like the story that I was reading and enjoying, and more like a series with independent monologue after independent monologue after independent monologue. Like number 2, all through the book, Onyebuchi captures small moments so well. It almost seems impossible to do this because he's paying so much attention to developing the big stuff in the world. Somehow he finds time for small details, like when Link is in the car with Sydney and he's excited to put his arm around her and she doesn't resist. We can feel that. Then further, he's a little bummed out that she doesn't put her arm around him, and we feel that too. But he also then considers if maybe it's because his knapsack was in the way. These are really small moments, but they feel large, and that's an accomplishment of the writing, that those moments can shine among all the other Goliath things that are going on. Like number 3, it's as if Onyebuchi decided on a dystopian world and was just not content with how limited those have been drawn in the past. He paints a dystopia as vivid as any I have seen in science fiction literature. So much detail is given from the roads, the homes, and the people, and not just what it looks like, but also how it came to be. This is one of the most descriptive post-apocalyptic Earths that I've seen. The city, out-of-control weeds, radiation zones, dead coal-black trees, etc. The character of the city in and around New Haven is as much a character in the story as the people are. Like number 4, Onyebuchi slips in a neat little moment when Mercedes is perusing her hacked apps to check on the health status of her friends. This is early in the book. This is a riff on the present day idea that the apps on our phones store so much personal information, they're spying on us, right? Geotags and other things that we take for granted as private. Because in this future Earth, it's just a given that these apps are tracking and storing this information. It is common to hack these apps as almost a childish hobby. Like number 5, this phrasing. The invariably white folk who cautioned Jonathan against youthful bravado, against infantile nonchalance. I love his choice of language. He could have just said he was naive, but that's not what he wanted to say. He wanted to exactly say that, the nonchalance, and I really appreciate that in the writing. Dislike number 3, Sydney's father being killed by the landmine was a real shock, and I think that it would have landed even harder if, for maximum impact, we got to see a little bit more of he and Sydney first. Take it away, Erica.
What did I like about Goliath? There were a lot of things that I liked about Goliath, but a couple of things that stood out to me was that Onyebuchi does not hold your hand. He jumps right into the conflict with both feet, and either you're going to keep up or you don't. I think he's very calculating in this way. He takes a hard, unflinching look at racism, privilege, gentrification, climate change, and the way that it affects the characters. He makes you think about the here and now, the past and the future, and how everything has come together and what the potential is for the future with all of these things coming together. The second thing that I liked about Goliath is that it was such a compulsive read. I found myself wanting to read it. I found that I couldn't wait to pick it back up. I'm a heavy annotator, and I found it really hard for me to slow down and annotate. And I think that was in part because it's non-linear and there are a lot of characters to keep up with. And I feel that if I had taken my time to annotate, I would have missed a lot of what Onyebuchi was trying to convey. I know that's kind of weird to say, but yeah, I did. I felt like I was gonna have some kind of FOMO. What didn't I like? There are a couple of things that stood out to me. There's this section in the book that took me out of the story, and it took me a while to get through. I mean, several days actually to get through it. It's written in journal type entries, and there were times that it felt pretty info dumpy. I kind of feel like if it was spread out over the course of the novel, it would have worked better for me. And the second thing that I just didn't get on board with, and I think it was, I don't want to say I didn't get on board with it, I think it was done deliberately, and that is that Onyebuchi kept readers at arm's length from the characters. And it's not that I was able to connect to the characters for the most part, because I did understand their fight and their plight, and there were characters that I absolutely loved and there were others that I didn't like so much. But I always felt that Onyebuchi had erected a wall around his most vulnerable characters, which were the marginalized folks that were left on this degraded planet Earth, and he didn't want them to be further victimized by the reader. I felt like he took you right up to the precipice of like really caring for them, but not giving you the opportunity to truly care for the characters. And I think that was very deliberate and very carefully thought out. But at the same time, it kind of, it left me wanting more. I wanted to connect more to the characters.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you for those who are still here. I'm Michael Evers, and this is Fit to be Read.